Hello everyone, it is Peter Sam, the Narrow Gauge Engine here. Today we'll be looking at every Season 4 episode, ranking them worst to best. It was so difficult to choose between the episodes in this series because they are so good. But anyway, enough of me rambling, let's move on to number 26. Now in number 26 is Thomas and Stepney. This episode was sort of the catalyst for a lot of the hit episodes. Because there's a new engine and Thomas is jealous. It happens all the time and I don't know why. He's just so unlikable in this episode. But it does end on a nice note and Stepney is an amazing character, so it's got that. But let's move on to number 25. Now in number 25 is Passengers and Polish. The episode is a lot like Thomas and Stepney in that it's just another character being unlikable, and this time it's Duncan. His foul mood and everything he does in this episode just ruins it for me. But the characters of Nancy and Scarlobi do redeem it, so for that I'm putting it at number 25. But let's move on to number 24. Now in number 24 is Paint Pots and Queens. Like with The Trouble with Mud, which was in Series 3, I dislike this one because it has inconsistencies too. First off, how are Thomas and Gordon still in trouble in Season 4 for what happened in Season 1 with Down the Mine and all of that? That's some weird timeline-ish that I don't want to know. That's just so stupid to me. Apart from that, it's a pretty good episode, I feel. It's just that one inconsistency that nags away at me every time I watch this episode, and it's kind of unbearable. But let's move on to number 23. Number 23 is Peter, Sam and the Refreshment Lady. I know it's kind of sacrilegious to put an episode about my mascot in 23rd, but I mean, this is just bland. It's just Peter Sam being rushed, and I'm pretty sure in the wide shots with Peter Sam and Henry's wearing Gordon's face. It's just foolish antics, nothing more to say really. Let's go to number 22. Now in number 22 is Fish. Fish is a lot like Flying Kipper, and you just have Duck in there. It's just the same episode basically. Henry sets off from the harbour or wherever, and then he goes somewhere, and on the way he has a crash. The only difference with this one being is that Duck's in there, but I cannot deny the crash is amazing, and plus the Flying Kipper was cool anyway, even if there is another episode about it now. So that's why it's here in number 22. But let's move on to number 21. In number 21 is Mind That Bike. I like Tom Tipper. He's great. He's a cute little postman. And that sequence where he's just driving around Sodor delivering the post is just absolutely... It's just because of the scenery. It's beautiful. And despite Percy wrecking his bike, he still manages to get his van back in the end. So it's like a happy accident. This episode is just like a very feel-good one. And it's very nice. And it sits nicely here at number 21. But now let's move to number 20. So in our number 20 spot is Bullseyes. The theme of this episode is great and I love it, and it's just a really cool like Spanish sort of theme. I don't know how you describe it, although you have to admit this is kind of just the same as Cows with Edward. Although fair play to the writers because it does make use of Toby's cow catchers, which I think is a very good thing to do, because kids don't really understand cow catchers even though like it's in the name what it does. So I think this episode does justice to Toby beautifully, and Daisy's character is just amazing in this. But let's move on to number 19. In number 19 is Thomas and the Special Letter. See, the meta-ness of this episode is best left in book format, I find. I think the episode kind of ruins the story for me. I mean, the crash is cool, but you know, it never stuck out to me. This was originally going to be at the bottom of my list, but now that I've heard the reasons that people like this, I've sort of given it a bit of leverage. So let's move on to number 18. Now in number 18 is Henry and the Elephant. This episode should have come in Season 1. I don't know why they put Season 4 episodes in Season 4, but they belonged in like earlier seasons. I don't get why they did that. Also note that the circus is called Topham Circus, so does that mean Sir Topham Hatt runs the circus? But apart from that, It's a fairly moderate episode. I didn't mind it. It was alright. What is with Henry and tunnels? Like, he locks himself in one from the rain, and then he finds an elephant in the other. But yeah, let's move on to number 17. So in number 17 is A Bad Day for Sir Handel. Again, this is a narrow gauge episode where Sir Handel's just angry. But the difference is with this one is I actually find this one amusing for some reason. I don't know why. There's not much really to say about this one. It's just a happy medium for me. So let's move on to number 16. Now in number 16 is Home at Last. I think Scarlo's return is a very nice one. The characters of Rusty and Duncan are also very good in this episode, I think. His crash in the tunnel as well, great. Just all around a fairly moderate, nice episode. And now let's move on to number 15. Now in number 15 is Rusty to the rescue. What great scenery this has, and the booming Diesel's voice just makes the atmosphere all the more eerie and spooky. Although this episode has a few shortcomings that make it a bit naff in my opinion. Like, how does the narrow gauge line stretch all the way to the mainland? And I don't like how Stepney is introduced in this episode, I've got to admit. I preferred the book version of how he was introduced, because Stepney is a real engine on a real railway. It would make sense for that to continue as a theme on, you know, this universe, this alternate universe. But yeah, that's just a few shortcomings I have with the episode. Now let's move on to number 14. Now in number 14 is Rock and Roll. See, this is such a cool concept for a character, and despite all of his complaining, I think Duncan's actually pretty cool in this episode. I also like the bit at the end where Rusty and Duncan make up. It's such a sweet, satisfying ending. I love it. But the next 13 just beat it out. So let's move on to number 13. Now in number 13 is Train Stops Play. Train Stops Play is great because of Caroline. She just looks so cool. I just think the whole concept of this episode is amazing. I definitely prefer this in like episode format rather than story format. Although I have to address that, yes, it is a lot like Bertie's Chase. But Bertie's Chase was good anyway. I don't think it makes it necessarily bad. But let's move on to number 12. In number 12 is Special Attraction. This is one of the better stories Christopher Audrey wrote, and it shows that in episode format. Toby's scenes are nice, while kind of boring. The bits with Bulstrode are far more interesting because he's just like Duncan if he was a boat. And that scene where the trucks all fall onto Bulstrode is just beautiful. And that ending shot with him on the beach looking sorry for himself, that's just the best part of the whole episode. Just every part of this episode stands out and has its own unique little thing to it, and I love it so much. Let's move on to number 11. In number 11 is Bulldog. I think the crash in this episode could have been dramatised just a bit more, but I have to admit it does show how brave Duke is. This is an episode based around determination, like Percy's promise and Edward's exploit before it. But let's move on to our top 10. Just before we get to our top 10, just a reminder, can you please drop a like, a subscribe? It helps me greatly. It motivates me to make videos like this, videos that you want to see. Thank you, and now let's move on to number 10. Now in number 10 is Bowled Out. I think the ending with the Diesel leaving is just class. Although I do find it sad that Stepney is leaving in this episode. Nevertheless, this episode is great. It's a fun one, it's a light-hearted one, and I definitely recommend you watch this because it's just great. Anyway, let's move on to number 9. So in number 9 is Steamroller. I think giving Sir Handel steamroller wheels makes him a more defined character. It gives him more character development. I really don't have anything negative to say about this episode, like genuinely. I think it's really great. It's just the other 8 beat it out. Being said, I love George as well. He's a very cool character. Although he is a bit like bulgy, but you know, that's alright. I just like the concept of how Sir Handel has steamroller wheels and he meets an actual steamroller. Anyway, let's move on to number 8. Now in number 8 is Toad Stands By. Scruffy is such a cool character, although it is reminiscent of like the brake van from season 2. Although I do think that Scruffy is much better than the brake van. The characters of Toad and Oliver, just great again, and his comeuppance is just well deserved. Although I don't like how they changed the ending of the episode to he gets repaired. Personally, I would have preferred it if he never did get repaired, but you know, it's fine. Anyway, let's move on to number 7. Now in number 7 is Special Funnel. Obviously, I love Peter Sam, he's my mascot. And I just think everything about this episode is just amusing. Like Peter Sam having a drain pipe on his funnel, and I think his new funnel is amazing. It's a very cool thing. People crap on Christopher Audrey because it's just like, oh, this is a thing and this is what it does on each of his stories, but Reverend Audrey was doing that way before, and it shows here. I mean, yeah, he wasn't doing it every bloody book, but you know, it would. So, anyway, I like Special Funnel. I think most people like Special Funnel. Let's move on to number 6 now. Now, in number 6 is another Peter Sam episode, Trucks. The slate quarry in this episode is just beautiful, and that crash is just epic. I mean, look at it. He just whacked a drain. And I think this episode also develops on Rusty a lot more because, I don't know, he seems like a very neglected character. He seems very pushed aside from the other engines on the narrow gauge railway. And it's also nice to see that Sir Handel gets his comeuppance in the end. He gets his punishment despite, you know, everything. Anyway, let's move on to number 5. Now, in number 5 is Four Little Engines. I think this is a great introduction to Skarloey, Renea, Sir Handel and Peter Sam. It's just an episode showing off how lovely and amazing the scenery is of this railway. And you can see every engine has a fully distinct personality. Skarloey is the wise one, Reneus is the brave one, Sir Handel is the work-shy one, and Peter Sam's the kind one. Anyway, enough of that. On to number 4. Now in the number 4 spot is Gallant Old Engine. This is another episode that's a lot like Percy's Promise and Edward's Exploit. Reneus gets stuck on the line and he needs to have the determination to pull through despite what's wrong with him. In a lot of ways, I think Gallant Old Engine is better than the predecessors that are like this, and that is mainly because of the ending. By the end of Skarloey's tale, we have no doubts that Reneus is a good engine, and him coming home at the end is just so satisfying. But anyway, let's move on to number 3. Now in number 3 is Sleeping Beauty. This is the episode where Duke is found, he is rescued. It's a great sense of closure for that little mini saga. I'd have to say that the fat clergyman falling into that shed is pretty amusing. Anyway, let's move on to number 2. Now in our number 2 spot is Grandpuff. What am I doing? Why is Grandpuff higher than the episode that's in number 1? Well, I'll tell you why. I prefer that episode, but we'll discuss that when we go over to there. For now, I want to shift our attention to Grandpuff. This episode makes me feel the feels, alright? It makes me feel all the feels, and our 3 characters, Duke, Stuart and Falcon, are just amazing. Although the fact that Grandpuff is before all the other narrow gauge episodes means that the reveal that, you know, Stuart and Falcon are Peter, Sam and Sir Handel, that's kind of ruined. But apart from that, I love it. It's just such a great episode. This used to be in my number 1 spot, if not for this next episode in number 1. And in our number 1 spot is You Can't Win. So what the hell am I doing putting You Can't Win above Grandpuff? Well, I'll tell you why. First off, it's Peter Sam episode. While this is similar to Time for Trouble, which was in season 3, it's much better here, I've got to say. Mainly because in Time for Trouble, Toby did not move an inch, but in this episode, Duke still had steam left, so he could trick people into thinking that he was helping Stuart instead of the other way around. And that ending is just, Stuart's reaction is gold. And I personally think we get to see these characters at their highest point in this episode because it's just amazing. Every time I watch this episode, it never loses its touch, and I just want to watch it more and more. So that's why this episode is in number 1. And yeah, so thank you all for watching, ranking every season 4 episode worst to best. I'll be coming back soon with another Tales from the Railway episode where you might actually see Duke. Let me know your opinions down below, and that's it from me. See you later.